Belief in angels is on the rise. According to a 1993 survey conducted by Time magazine, 2/3 of Americans admit belief in their existence, with 1/3 claiming personal experience of an angelic presence. A more recent poll, published by the Associated Press, places belief as high as 7 out of 10. By way of contrast, fewer US adults believe in the devil and demons, meaning angels are, to many of us, more real than the horrors of devilish minions and satanic hellfire. Such a statement will no doubt come as a surprise to many, especially when one considers the view of Doctors Rupert Sheldrake and Matthew Fox, the biologist and the priest who jointly wrote the 1996 book The Physics of Angels. In the modern day, while science and religion rarely agree on anything, they can at least find common ground in regards to angels. They are an embarrassment to the good sense and integrity of both disciplines. But why? We have already acknowledged that as a species, most of us believe in or even assert having had personal interaction with angelic beings. Throughout history, it has been much the same, with those who do not believe consistently finding themselves in the minority. Even when we set aside traditional Western understandings of angels and consider them at a global level, we find these same beings, celestial messenger spirits who both minister and protect everywhere, simply under different names. Indeed, it might even be said that there are parallels to be found in ufology. Non-human, light-associated entities descending from the sky with messages to give. It is perhaps then no coincidence that the revival of interest in angels seems to mirror an expansion of interest in UFOs and extraterrestrials. The majority of us seem to know that something is happening in the heavens above, with one sensational and well-revered story, today remembered as the miracle of the sun, doing much to suggest that, in some cases at least, angels and extraterrestrials might not be that different after all. My name is Laura, and you are watching The Paranormal Scholar. In the spring of 1916, a 9-year-old Lúcia dos Santos and her 2 cousins, Francisco and Jacinta Marto, were herding sheep near their home in Portugal. Such work was not unusual for children in the early 20th century, and so they took it in their stride, the 3 of them playing together as they watched over the livestock, rotating them through the small plots of land owned by their parents in the different parts of the mountainous plateau on which the village of Fátima stood. Lúcia, Francisco and Jacinta were therefore amusing themselves with one of their usual games when something strange is said to have happened. According to Lúcia's memoir, written sometime later, a strong wind began to shake the trees of the olive grove in which they were playing. Their attention roused by the sudden gust, the children are then said to have turned their heads to see what was happening. There, in the distance, above the trees that stretched to the east, a light whiter than snow is said to have appeared. It was in the form of a young man, quite transparent and as brilliant as crystal in the rays of the sun. The children were transfixed and watched as the figure came closer. When he did, he supposedly spoke, saying, "Do not be afraid, I am an angel of peace." He then instructed the young trio to pray. With what Lúcia described as a supernatural impulse, they did just that, with the bright and luminous man guiding them through a prayer which, he said, would, if repeated, bring Jesus and Mary to them. After that, the crystalline apparition disappeared, leaving the children shocked and, so Lúcia wrote, locked in silence. Indeed, according to her memoir, his words sank so deeply into our minds that we never forgot them, and ever after we used to spend long periods on our knees repeating them, sometimes until we fell down exhausted. Even so, later that same year, when the illuminated figure appeared again before the children, he is said to have chastised them for their lack of spiritual discipline. They must, so he supposedly said, offer prayers and sacrifices to God, in reparation for the sins by which he is offended. In that way, so the bright and transparent man went on, the children would bring peace to our country. namely Portugal, of which the figure claimed to be the guardian angel. After this, he once again disappeared. And so it went on, the children praying and offering reparation for the outrages, sacrileges, and indifferences by which God is offended, sometimes by themselves, and at other times with the strange light of the angel shining over them. Then, many months later, on the 13th of May the following year, a lady dressed in white is said to have appeared before the children. Lucia was now 10 years old, Francisco 8, and Jacinta 7, and they were pasturing their sheep in a hilly depression owned by Lucia's father, known as the Cove of Irene. Oddly, for the day was otherwise clear, they were startled to see a flash of lightning, immediately after which a lady dressed in white appeared atop an oak tree. She is reported as having shone brighter than the sun, giving out rays of clear and intense light so bright that the children, even at a distance of about 5 feet, found themselves within it. When the illuminated woman spoke, she said, "Please don't be afraid of me. I'm not going to harm you." When the children asked her where she was from, she said heaven, and then proceeded to explain that she would return again to them, even providing them a date, and that, just as the angel before had mentioned, it was very important that they pray and make sacrifices in order to repair the damages that sinners were currently wreaking on earth. In this way, she supposedly made reference to the Great War that was currently, unbeknownst to the young children, raging in Europe. Bring peace to the world, she told them, and an end to the war. At that, the illuminated woman is said to have risen slowly in the direction of the east, until she disappeared in the immense distance, the light which encircled her seeming to make a way amidst the stars. With the arrival of this second apparition, the children were no longer able to keep their experiences secret, and so the youngest, 7-year-old Jacinta revealed what she and her brother and cousin had seen to her parents. And so, by the time the date which the lady in white had named as the date of her next appearance arrived, the 3 children were joined by a small crowd of people. They spoke with the illuminated woman again, with her message somewhat eerily, this time being that it would soon be time for her to take Francisco and Jacinta to heaven. As for Lucia, so the ethereal woman said, you will remain a little longer. There was, after all, still work to be done on earth. As for the others present, it is recorded that they knew that something unusual had occurred, with testimonies alternating between the witnessing of strange lightning, the perceiving of a certain dimming of the sun, and also of the appearance of a little grey cloud that came and went as the apparition did. By the end of 1917, the lady supposedly visited the children 4 more times. It was during her final visit of the year, on the 13th of October, that she claimed to be the Lady of the Rosary. It was also on that occasion that between 50 and 70,000 spectators witnessed a sensational event now known as the Miracle of the Sun. Specifically, a fantastical display of multicolored lights in the sky which culminated in the sun or some other great wheel of fire detaching itself from its place in the sky so as to fall upon all those who had gathered to witness the apparition. This miraculous and by all accounts heart-stopping happening was extensively documented due to the vast numbers of people who, on the guidance of the 3 children who announced the date given to them by the lady for her next appearance, had travelled from all over to see what was promised to be a spectacular event. In the words of one journalist, one could see the immense multitude turn towards the sun, which appeared free from the clouds and in its zenith. It looked like a plaque of dull silver, and it was possible to look at it without the least discomfort. The sun then trembled and made sudden, incredible movements outside all cosmic laws. The sun danced. It whirled on itself like a giant Catherine wheel that lowered itself to the earth as if to burn it in its rays. Another testimony, this time from Maria de Capellinha, one of the earliest followers of the apparitions, described how the sun turned everything to different colours, yellow, blue and white, before shaking, trembling and falling to the earth. Everything was still and quiet, reported the father of Jacinta and Francisco, and then it began to move and to dance in the sky until it seemed to detach itself from its place and fall upon us. It was a terrible moment. Many in the crowd who observed the happening thought they were about to perish, and that the great, trembling, falling light in the sky would crush them. Many even began to pray and confess their sins aloud. When at last the sun stopped leaping and moving, so a witness explained, we all breathed our relief. Others who were present that day described the appearance as being akin to a dull silver disc. Others again referenced the immensity of its strongly radiating heat. Many were struck by the still and soundless atmosphere that gripped the crowd before it fell. And so, considering this, it is not difficult to understand why one might be immediately tempted to draw comparisons between the miracle of the sun at Fatima and a UFO sighting. Moreover, the more one examines this case, the more one finds similarities not merely to sightings of so-called extraterrestrial craft, but to claims made by alleged alien contactees also. Indeed, the manner in which both the guardian angel of Portugal and the Lady of the Rosary spoke to the children can be said to be reminiscent of the way so-called alien beings are alleged to speak to the humans they interact with. For example, the Lady of the Rosary, who is commonly identified as the Virgin Mary, immediately assured that she was not there to harm the children, and that they therefore had no reason to be afraid of her. The angel, when he first appeared, is reported to have said something similar. Considering alien abductee cases, we are likewise told that the beings stress that they will not cause hurt, even when they then proceed to do precisely that. For example, in the recently explored case of Lieutenant Robert Salas, the dark, hooded figure who allegedly abducted him is said to have reassured him telepathically that the medical procedure he was being forced to undergo would not hurt, after which he felt extreme pain. Similar again is the testimony of Calvin Parker in the Pascagoula abduction, with the words "Don't be afraid" said to have been transferred from the being to the young man, all without the being's lips moving. Both Parker and his companion that night in 1973, Charles Hickson, reported experiencing pain and even minor wounds on their bodies during their experience. Back to the testimony of the 3 shepherd children of Fatima, it may also then be interesting to consider the prophecy of the Lady of the Rosary, that the 2 youngest children, Francisco and Jacinta, would soon be taken to heaven. According to Lucia's memoir, this message was given on the 13th of June 1917. Less than 3 years later, by February 1920, both young Francisco and Jacinta were dead. Given all that they experienced, the strange and blinding lights, the flashes of supernatural lightning, the rays of clear and intense energy which radiated from the female apparition, one could consider the effects that such exposure might have had on their young and fragile bodies in a similar way to how, in ufology, the physical effects of being exposed to an alien craft are often explored. In the case of Linda Jones, who reported approaching a hovering craft on the banks of the River Mersey in 1979, she was left with red, burnt and scaly skin on her face the morning after her close encounter. Similar effects are seen in other stories too, with there being abundant testimony and even physical evidence of symptoms and injuries consistent with burns and, in the worst case, radiation sickness after encountering an oddity alleged to have been extraterrestrial. Of course, all of this is massively speculatory. It would be reckless to present this as anything less. And yet, just as it is fascinating to consider why there is a resurgence of belief in angels, it is equally intriguing to draw lines between 2 seemingly separate sets of phenomena. For indeed, angels and other religious occurrences have always been presented as distinctly, for lack of a better word, alien-y. Or, more accurately, alien phenomena often presents as rather angelic. After all, traditional depictions of angels are not white wings and soft feminine faces. They are odd and fiery, or as the medieval German Benedictine abbess, polymath and mystic Hildegard von Bingen worded it, they are living light. They do not have wings like birds, but are still hovering flames. and so, in other words, arguably very similar to modern-day descriptions of UFOs. For biblical Ezekiel, angels, even more strangely, were said to have existed at the center of a brilliantly illuminated windstorm of fire that looked like glowing metal. More broadly, it is also interesting to consider the Book of Miracles, an illustrated manuscript created in Augsburg around the year 1550. It presents many wondrous and eerie phenomena spiritually attributed, including multiple suns in the sky at the same time, as well as shape-changing stars, strange illuminated manifestations, and other celestial signs. Here, once again, one could argue for a muddling between religious and alien phenomena. And for those skeptical of the Christian framing of the messages given to the shepherd children by the ethereal visitors, the crossover can even be said to work the other way around, with some self-described alien abductees reporting being shown images and films by their abductors that include imagery of Christ on the cross. Often, such encounters will feature an urgent call to action by the alleged alien beings, namely the need to protect the planet from pollution or greed or war or generally, well, sin. In the case of the anonymous Avis family, who reported being abducted from their car on their way home in 1974, they completely changed their lifestyle and personal habits after being shown images of humanity's destruction of both the planet and ourselves at a special and personal level. It was, in many ways, a religious conversion experience. A lesser-known case, dating to the same year but in Blacksod, Ireland, describes an encounter that a man had with a brilliant white light in his bedroom. According to the article in Flying Saucer Review in which it is featured, when he was woken by the light, he was surprised to find an angel in his room, a man in white robes who proceeded to fade away. The man got out of bed so as to investigate. On the way to his window, he supposedly saw an object outside, a glowing white craft which started to rise slowly in an easterly direction and, without any noise whatsoever, disappeared into the clouds. In short, an angel in a spaceship. Arguably the most chilling similarity between the Fatima case and abduction phenomena, however, comes when one examines the role of children. For certainly, just as Lucia was told by the ethereal woman from heaven that she had a greater mission to complete on Earth, children involved in alien abductions have been told similar. For example, once again considering the 1974 Averley abduction and the testimonies of the Avises, the family's oldest child, a boy called Kevin, revealed that the beings aboard the craft gave him lots of things to do when he grew up. Speaking with a researcher who documented the case, he expressed that he had forgotten precisely what they said, with it may well being that the information, whatever it was now lodged deep in his subconscious mind for later activation. Similarly, another English case, this time from Kent, centred on a boy called Jason Andrews. The activity, which included the appearance of terrifying watchers in the woods, is said to have heightened on his 4th birthday, when the boy entered a bizarre trance-like state. He appeared to still be asleep and yet spoke oddly, supposedly spewing out an incredible stream of numbers, strange algebraic configurations, mathematical terms like pi, and binary codes. After which he attempted to leave the house, stating to his terrified parents that he needed to go because they're waiting for me. Whoever they were, they continued to have an interest in Jason for many years to come, abducting him repeatedly, expressing to him that he had a special mission, and that, unsettlingly, he was them and they were him. That is not, of course, to say that we ought to paint angels as horrific, child-abducting alien beings. Certainly, it is in many ways much more appropriate to draw links between religious divine messengers and the aliens of old, specifically those Nordic humanoids more commonly reported in the earlier to mid-decades of the 20th century than in the present day. The ones who, according to testimonies presented by contactees like George Adamski, would politely invite you aboard their craft for a token spin around the heavens, rather than drag you from your bed in the middle of the night so as to strap you to a cold grey table for the purpose of painful medical molestations. Beneficent and not malevolent, angelic and not demonic. Fascinatingly, Adamski even described his experience of being in the presence of one of the otherworldly humanoids as being like the warm embrace of great love and understanding wisdom, a sentiment very similar to that of divine love expressed by Lucia in her Fatima memoir. The extraterrestrial Nordic humanoids were also said to be highly spiritual and concerned with the Earth's ecological condition. Less fascinating and more terrifying is something else that mid-20th century Nordic contactees alleged to have been told: that the Nordics were not the only visitors to Earth. Indeed, another alien species, far less spiritual and emotionally degenerate, if still technologically advanced, had the planet in their sights. It has been speculated that the beings today referred to as the Greys may represent one such species. And so, the notion that there are many players on the board, both good and bad. In this way, one can, if one is so inclined, begin to sort alien contact experiences into two piles: those with beings who say they come in peace and mean it, and those who still say it but don't. In some way, a mimicry of peace, or, if one would rather, a demon attempting to deceive. For after all, that is what dark preternatural beings are said to do: lie, trick, and lead astray with the intention of causing harm. The dark demon who impersonates a deceased loved one using a Ouija board. The almond-eyed extraterrestrial who promises a pain-free experience and then proceeds to insert very long and very painful needles into each and every orifice. None of this is a new concept. Researchers and authors have, in the quiet corners of ufology, been talking about this for decades, if not longer. One particularly striking conclusion came from Salvador Freixedo, the Spanish Jesuit and UFO researcher and author. It was his belief that parallels can and should be drawn between the behavior of UFOs and demons, and that just as so-called spacecraft help to prove the reality of many demonic happenings, demonology can help us to understand the possible motives of UFO phenomena. He even went so far as to say that there is a link between the increasing social, political, and religious agitation of the modern day and the ever-mounting number of UFO sightings. The succinct suggestion being that as Nordics have retreated, malevolent, grey-type aliens have invaded, bringing with them their demonic ways. And so, depending upon your appetite for theology, such a concept could paint the subject of ufology as a heavenly-hellish dichotomy. Nordics and similar are angels. Greys and similar are demons. There is even the theory presented by Rupert Sheldrake in his book The Physics of Angels, that angels might feel that by manifesting as UFOs, they'll get through to some people better than in any other form. That they may very well choose to adopt the imagery of science fiction, all while maintaining angelic archetypes that have been widely recognized for centuries. It is, so his co-author Matthew Fox adds, the reconnecting of our imaginations to the spiritual tradition. And so, what of the happenings at Fatima? Do they represent something angelic, something alien, or might these questions simply represent the same thing? Given the descriptions of both the young man being of light and the woman from heaven, the Lady of the Rosary, if they were extraterrestrial, they seem to align more with the human appearance of the benevolent aliens of old, encountered by not only the controversial Adamski, but also by other early contactees like Albert Coe. They were not odd, emotionally decrepit, deformed things that made the children fearful. They did not kidnap them. They did not, true to their word, hurt them. In fact, even despite the tragic deaths of 2 of the 3 less than 3 years later, sicknesses which should more properly be attributed to Spanish influenza and tuberculosis than anything extraterrestrial, the Angel of Portugal and the Lady of the Rosary made the children feel tremendously loved. And at the end of the day, that might be all we can count on to be true. What an experience makes us feel, and not necessarily the precise details that explain what it is. Thank you so much for watching. I truly hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please be sure to like and subscribe for more of the paranormal. You can also support my work more directly by becoming a member, either here on YouTube or via Patreon. Whatever the case, your support simply by watching my videos is tremendously appreciated. Thank you again. Until next time.